Welcome to the Week 7 wrap-up here at this 16th season of Blood, Sweat, and Beers. What is in a name? Does the name of your team really matter? Some of us are more given to name changes than others. I know that Joe has had a number of name changes over the years, Smart Fish and Pet Detectives and random other ones. I've had several name changes over the years, but some of you pretty much stick to your name. In fact, sometimes even past its relevance. Obviously, when you use a player or a team, sometimes the name becomes, well, stale. It becomes irrelevant when the player moves on or is no longer playing. Right, Cool Breeze? You hung on to that one for a little while, Keith, before leaning into the name change. When AB was last place and got his name changed, he could not wait to get back to his tried and true read option. I get it. Play on your name. It's got a pun. But does it really matter? How long will puzzles be puzzles? How long will Jersey birds be Jersey birds? And Augustus Gloop 9? I mean, we get it. It's random and continues to be confusing, but are you bored with it yet? And Poncho. I know you identify as Poncho, whose origin story is kind of funny, but will there ever be some adjustments there? How important is that? Will Don Chris go back to Light Rail Coyote after experiencing the joy that is changing your name randomly or being told what your name is randomly? Just curious if it even matters. Really, I've been enjoying Keith's leaning into the name change for himself. I actually really like Snuffleupagus because I like Sesame Street. But speaking of names, so first of all, you've got this imaginary character of a made-up character on a children's television show. An imaginary character, an imaginary friend of an imaginary character. The imaginary character's name, whose friend is Snuffleupagus? Big Bird. Now, how do you go from Big Bird to some fever dream, random, made-up animal with a made-up name? Like, how drunk was that guy? And what was he really trying to say that got him to Snuffleupagus? It's crazy. And Big Bird? Hey, guys, I'd like you to meet my new pet, Brown Dog. I don't understand. Like it's goes from one of the most creative things to literally an void of creativity. So really, does it matter the name? Because many of us who grew up with Sesame Street refer to Big Bird like Big is a name. I guess Larry would argue that Bird is a last name, but anyway, does it even really matter? I don't know. Anyway, let's look at the scores from this past week. Stop talking about names and made up things. Let's talk about our made up scores instead. Excellent. Unfortunately, Commish was on a good roll. Puzzles was on a slide, and they reversed their fortunes there. Yeah, that was a rough one. It was frustrating. Both players or teams ended up having a wide receiver play a few snaps and then leave. So that was a fairly even trade. However, Commish with Jaden Daniels, what could have been? Oh my goodness. I was so excited. 46 yards on his first play from scrimmage against the worst, arguably, I know the Browns are in running with that, but arguably, we'll say one of the worst teams in football. They put 40 points up with the backup, Emerkaz Mariota. I don't understand why. I understand why. Rib injury. He's the franchise. But man, what could have been? That could have been an epic career day for him. Whatever. What I like about this game is absolutely nothing. I really don't like anything about it. And you see what could have been. Obviously, there were a lot of points left on both benches and very terrible pops. Whatever. Moving on to the next score, we've got Booger Pickers and Skibbity. Skibbity comes in hot. Almost 160 points, high score on the week. Does a really nice job. And in fact, if we look at the the total or possible scores and closest to that, just barely misses that 100%, just barely misses his perfect roster. But as you see, even the boogers couldn't have made it. Best score he could have mustered, could have scratched up was a 137.06. So wouldn't have done anything anyway. What I do like about this one is that, man, the Washington defense actually scored some points. In fact, both defenses broke 30 points for both of those teams. So defenses matter. I see a bunch of you picked up some streaming defenses this week. Maybe you picked up on that too. Our next score, Snuffleupagus and AGN, Augustus Gloop 9. This was another interesting one. Looked like Gloop was going to storm back after being overreacted as not making the playoffs, but Snuffy ended up working his way on a Monday night. I wouldn't call it a miracle, but did a nice job. If you look at the potential and then the pops, Snuffles is in the 90% again. Gloop left a ton of points on the bench. Obviously could have brought something to this game, could have done something, but Pollard, White, if you would have swapped those out, if you had anybody in for the flex spot, but it was not to be. Snuffles gets on a roll, leading the league, 6-1, league best record, and Gloop continues to slide as though he may not make the playoffs. Our next score, battle of the Cardinal fans. It was like an all-Cardinal shootout on Monday night. I feel like half the rosters were Cardinal fans, which was not all that enjoyable to watch. Interesting to see how it worked out. It really wasn't all that close. If you look at the potential scores and the pops, both left a ton of points on the bench, so either one could have won. And if you look at where they ended up, Reed is taking advantage of the slip by Kamish and sliding into or hanging on to that number one spot in the West. We'll look at the standings here in just a minute. Our final score, Peanuts and Pet Detectives. So yeah, as it turned out, I'm going to call it that Derrick Henry unfortunately put Pet Detectives down, gave John his second win of the season. Again, if you look at the points on the bench, the possible points that could have been, Pancho did a pretty nice job. Second most points scored this week anyway, but man, did Joe leave a lot of points on the bench. Should we talk about Joe's bench again? Wouldn't have beaten anybody this week, but would have gotten awfully close, nearly 100 points on his bench, and that's with his best kicker on bye week, who carries 2 kickers. Anyway, unfortunately, those guys are hanging out in the basement, trades notwithstanding. We'll see what happens as they move on to the second half of the season. All right. As we look at our standings here, again, in the West, Reed took advantage of the slip by Kamish. Skibbity slides in there with a monster game this week. And so, again, mucking around. Nobody's really totally out of it, although Joe's really working hard at being totally out of it as early as he can. In the East, Snuffles continues to hang on to that number one spot. Now 2 games ahead in the East, making a strong case for a first round bye going into the playoffs. We'll see if anybody can shake that up. But as you look at the projections, other than our number ones, Snuffy and Reed option, there's a lot of wide openness. Even I would really say Augustus Gloop has a decent shot, although he's making a good case for not making the playoffs either. So there we are with that. Our season stats, no real surprise. Our number 1 and 2 are coming in with some decent points, although Reed option is doing this, AB is doing this without a ton of points. Everybody in the West hasn't broken 900 yet. Everybody in the East has. We don't want to fact check that. It doesn't really matter. We're going to stick with that, but we'll see how that shapes up as we continue on. One extra stat that I want to add before we leave, keeping track of all of the pops. Well, I went back starting in week 1. Here is your overall standings for best best percentage of perfection, 7 weeks standing. Augustus Gloop edging out. Well, it was Slappy. Now it's Snuffy. Whatever his name is, it makes no. It's no surprise that the 2 and 3 spot are in the 1 and 2 spots overall in the league. But interesting that Gloop is maxing out his roster and still just 2 wins on the season. Maybe it's time for a shakeup there. Anyway, those are all your numbers. Looking ahead this week, we want to focus in on AB versus Snuffy. Number 1 and number 1. East and West, number 1 and number 2 overall. Will AB knock him down a peg and put himself tied for the number 1 overall? Or will Snuffy extend his league leading standing? We'll see. Enjoy week 8.